Hey everyone, this is Jake Walker with BMI Imaging Systems. Just wanted to welcome you all out to our webinar today. Today we're going to be talking about the cost of microfilm scanning. It's going to be pretty specific to microfilm. I guess it's just a little bit of a disclaimer to those of you who aren't quite positive what type of material you have, or maybe you have both. We do hear the terminology being interchanged quite a bit for microfilm and microfiche. The majority of the conversation is going to be about the actual rolls of microfilm as opposed to the sheets of microfiche. I think it's still going to be really beneficial for those of you that only have microfiche to stick around and pay attention and learn some things, because a lot of it does apply to microfiche, but we will have a very specific webinar, I believe, in the near future about microfiche, being that there's just a few different challenges that we face with microfiche as opposed to microfilm. So before I get started here, I know there's still some folks rolling in. Could everyone, I believe on the right-hand side, or however whether you're using the desktop version or not, there's an option to raise your hand. If you could raise your hand just to let me know that you can hear me. Looks like we're getting some hands. Okay, good. We just, with everyone using this technology because of the COVID-19 situation, we've had some technical issues in the past. So just wanted to make sure everyone can hear me, and we'll go ahead and get started then. So a little bit about BMI. We've been around for a long time. We've been around since the 50s. We began as a microfilming company, so we just created microfilm back then. We've evolved with the technology to scanning microfilm. We still do create microfilm. There are a few, people companies that require microfilm. So we still do create microfilm, but at a much smaller scale. So mostly we're digitizing and scanning paper microfilm. We do legacy data conversion. So those of you that have old student record systems that you can't really use, aren't very functional, or you want to update them, we can help you update them as well, get them into your current new system or into something else that's a little bit more functional, usable, and it's a very inexpensive way to modernize your old legacy data. Of course, we work with all the main systems that a lot of you are familiar with. On-base, Laserfiche, Perceptive, SharePoint, you name it. We can work with that. We've got a couple facilities out here in California, and then we have lots of partner facilities across the country that we can utilize if necessary. But most of the work that we do is out of our California offices. We attend all the big national and regional conferences, Acro, Acrotech, SACROs, PACROs, all the different CROs. So you've probably seen us at the different shows as a vendor. If you haven't, please check us out whenever we do pick up going to those things again. We'll be happy to chat with you. We do live demos and whatnot, and we have good giveaways. We give away TVs of those of you who've been there. It's always a fun thing. So because of that, we have clients all across the country. Big universities, small universities, colleges, small schools, you name it. We've done work with them. So we've got a big presence across the country. So let's get right into it. Or I guess before I get right into it, there's an option to put questions. If you have questions as I'm going through, you're all on mute if you haven't noticed already. So you can't chime in and ask questions, but if you do have questions, feel free to type those out in the little question bar, and I'll go over those at the end. If there aren't any questions, then that's fine. Also, you can email me, which we'll have my email there at the end if you do have questions. So 9 factors that are going to influence your microfilm scanning. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Hopefully some of you had an opportunity to go onto our website, and we have a big old write-up about these 9 things, and so hopefully this is a review for some of you. Those of you who did not have a chance to check that out, you can pull it up and kind of go along with it with me, or you can get a lot of the information here today. So the first thing we're going to talk about, which in my opinion is probably the biggest factor in what the cost is going to be, is the volume, the total number of rolls. So getting a number of the rolls is probably the most important, maybe the first step that you need to do in this process when you guys are looking into scanning your microfilm. It's fairly easy, depending on the volume, to get a count. Usually they're in drawers or in boxes, and you can get a rough estimate. As you see in this image here, there's 4 rows. I think there's about, I haven't counted this, but usually it's about 16 or so that fit. And of course, it depends on the size of the microfilm. fit in each one of those little rows or columns. So you can do the math that way, or you can have someone physically count them. I know some of you that have less than maybe 500 or so. That's pretty easy to do. Some of the registrars we work with have thousands of roles, and so that could be a little bit more difficult to get a count and even an exact count. But either way, getting a decent estimate of the total number of roles is going to help you, because that gives us an idea on how we're going to price this. So our pricing is going to be based on volume. So if you have 100 roles, you're going to be in the higher per roll cost, which if you've gone through our website, usually is around $40. That's about the highest it's going to be. When you have 100 rolls of microfilm or 80 rolls of microfilm, that's a good baseline. Of course, there's lots of other factors that can go into that, and that can make it go up or down. And we're going to talk about those, but that gives you an idea for the low end. And then the high end, you have 1,000, 2,000 reels of microfilm. You're going to be in our lower end, the $20 to $25 per roll. That's where you're going to be because of the higher volume. And so that's just something to consider. So if you can get an idea, with 800, 900 rolls, that gives us at least a ballpark. We can say, that's going to be around $30 or $25 a roll, and that at least gets things started. I know a lot of times it's just a matter of, hey, we just need to see if this is even going to fit in our budget. How far off are we going to be? And we don't mind, window shoppers and tire kickers. That's not a big deal. So just, we let us know what you have, and we'll be happy to at least give you an idea on what the average cost is, what the ballpark cost is going to be. So when you get a chance, if you haven't already, get an idea on the total number of rolls, and we can get you an idea on what that cost could possibly be, depending on a few factors that we'll go over here as we go through the slides. So the next important thing is the type of microfilm. There are many different types of microfilm. I've been doing this for a while, and I've worked with lots and lots of registrars, so I've seen lots of different types of things, but typically we see 16 millimeter microfilm. There is also 35 millimeter microfilm, but we rarely, if ever, see that with student records or registrar type records. So I'm only going to really talk about 16 millimeter. If you have 35 millimeter, please let me know. I'd love to hear about it, because I'd like to see what's on it, because I've never seen that before. So 16 millimeter, the most common type of 16 millimeter microfilm is simplex. That's what you see there in that first image, where it's just one image after another. Sometimes you'll see blips underneath it, which are those tiny little boxes that you see in the second image. That's not going to affect the cost, but we can talk about that in the indexing portion. But simplex is just where it's one image after another. It's 16 millimeters. It's basically all lined up nice and even, something similar to that. Those are usually 8.5 by 11 documents, but with registrars we see lots of the tiny little slips, add drops, and things like that. That's not that big of a deal. It's just basically they're just smaller images. We're still able to capture those just fine. It's not really going to add too much to the cost, but it could affect the total number of images on a roll, which could potentially affect the cost. So a standard microfilm scanning job for a registrar is going to be a 16 millimeter simplex 100-foot roll. That's the average. That's what we typically see. That's going to be your lowest cost option. Those tend to have around 2,500 to possibly 3,000 images on each roll. We also see the duplex, which is that next image where you see top and bottom images. That's basically the front and back sides of documents. We see that quite a bit. Now, that could add or double the total number of images, which could affect the cost depending on how many total there are. A lot of times we're able to work within the same confines of the original pricing, but sometimes there may need to be an adjustment if there's too many of those. But that's certainly something you're going to want to let us know about if you know that exists, so that we can kind of price accordingly so there's not any surprises. A few times we've come across where it's, we expected everything to be 16 millimeter simplex, and then we found out there's 3 or 4, maybe 5 rolls that are duplex. Not that big of a deal. We'll work with you on that. But if there's hundreds, and if it's doubling the amount of work we're going to have to do, then we're going to have a conversation probably about, how we go about that. So we want to find that early and ahead of time so that there's not any surprises. And Yeah, so that again, and if that's 25, if that's a 215-foot roll, which is the other size, that's essentially double the 100-foot roll. So you can expect an increase in price there because there's much more to scan. And the way you find that out, it's still a little difficult for even those of us in the industry, is the 16 millimeter simplex, the 100-foot, is going to be a little bit thicker than your standard or than a 215-foot roll, and so they call that thick film. So unless you've seen 215 and 100-foot roll, you probably aren't going to know the difference in the thickness. But if you do notice that, hey, this roll of film is much thinner than the others, that's probably a 215. Excuse me. So the 215-foot roll is going to have possibly double the number of images that a 100-foot roll would have. So that will probably increase the price, maybe 50% or so. So again, if you have that, you're going to want to let us know that you have that so that we can prepare for that. So total number, we don't typically price per image. I know a lot of companies that do price per image. So and knowing that is going to be really important if you're looking at other quotes or if you're talking to a company right now that prices per image. Because if you're getting prices for a roll of microfilm and it's a standard simplex 16 millimeter 100-foot roll and they're giving you price for 2,500 frames, you're not going to be even near the budget that you would need to have if for whatever reason you have actual duplex rolls or 215-foot rolls. So it's going to end up being twice as expensive as you thought, and you're already in contract and they're already doing the project and now you're stuck. That happens a lot. So we price it by roll to avoid any conflict that could possibly come about, because there's really no way to know how many images there are on a roll throughout the entire project. It would just take way too much effort. So we do it per roll. So it hopefully will, put a stopgap to any of those issues that could potentially come up, where there's more images than we thought. And again, we're going to work with you on this. We're going to be fair. We're going to try our hardest to make sure that everybody, we come to a resolution. If there's not many outliers, not a big deal. If there's a lot, then we'll probably have to come up with something. But you're never stuck. We're never going to send you a bill and say, hey, you're stuck with this. We're always going to let you know ahead of time. We're going to say, hey, look, we're coming across some, 215-foot rolls that we weren't anticipating, or hey, these are duplex. We thought they were simplex. What should we do? Here's what the price could be, and we're always going to let you know ahead of time. We're not just going to scan everything and say, here's the bill. Now you guys need to deal with it. So we're going to have an open line of communication there, which I think is going to be really, really, really helpful. And that makes us a really good fit and a great partner for a lot of these projects, because you're never going to be stuck with a bill that you weren't anticipating. So the next factor, which with registrars and student records, it's never come into play, but it is something to be aware of, and that's resolution. That's the DPI, the PPI. It's what we scan the images at. There's not a whole lot to cover with this section. 99% of the projects that we do is at the standard, which is 300 DPI. You have the option to pick whatever DPI you want. We always recommend 300 DPI. I think 200 DPI is a little bit, it's not quite good enough. 400 DPI, as you see in this image below, there's not a whole lot of contrast there. But there are some sectors, some type of clients that we work with where they're going to want 400 DPI because you can get a little bit better OCR text results. For example, we do a lot of newsprint scanning for libraries and archives. Some of our clients from that sector in the ancestral records would like a higher DPI, but like I said, 99% of the clients we work with with registrars are 300 DPI. That's the standard. You can get away with 200 DPI when you're scanning paper and things because it's just a much better format to capture images. But microfilm, it's a little bit more challenging, so you're going to want that 300 DPI for sure. Anything above that, in my opinion, is overkill. 600 DPI is just crazy. The file sizes are going to be huge. It's going to be twice. It's going to take at least twice as long to scan them, so your project's going to be twice as expensive. So I guess the factors that you need to consider with that, if it's even a consideration, is that higher DPI means bigger file sizes, slower scanning time, slower time moving the images around on our servers and from different process flows. So that will affect the overall cost. It does not improve the records. I don't think or it does improve the records, but it does not improve the records to a point where it justifies that added cost. So we'll always recommend we just do it at the standard 300 DPI. But of course, you can request a higher DPI if you would like. That's entirely up to you. The next point, which I think is the second most important point, which as far as cost goes, because this is going to be the biggest, second biggest factor in what the total cost of the project is going to be, and that's indexing. Those of you that have talked with me before, which I see some of the names on here are familiar, and those of you that I've met at conferences or that have come by, you know that this is something we talk about. It's really, really, really pertinent and important to talk about this when we're talking about microfilm indexing. That first line there you see, the wild and wacky world of indexing, that is an actual blog post that we have on our website. I highly recommend that you check that out. It's right there on that first page, I think, if you sift through some of the blogs. If you haven't already, there's a lot of good information. I'm not going to be able to cover everything today. I mean, there's hours worth of material that we can talk about as far as indexing goes. I'm just going to do some top-level discussion here, but I highly recommend that you check that out. And we can send out a link after the conference as well, where you can request it if you're not able to find that on our website. But there's a lot of really important information there. So the first way you can index it is by role level. Essentially what we're doing is we're just duplicating the exact way they're presented right now. So you open a drawer of microfilm, and typically the drawer tells you what's on it, A through D, or it has some type of a date range or something on it. If it doesn't, then you probably know how it's all organized. But we replicate that. So if it's in drawers that are named by a certain way, we create a folder that's a certain way. And on that role label, typically it's going to tell you the semester, year, possibly a name range, could be a date range. It varies from project to project, but you have some identifying information on the label of that role, which tells you what's in that role. So we'll replicate that, and we'll create a folder that states exactly that, and then all the images are then sequentially listed within that folder. So when you're looking for the last, student Jake Walker, you would know, okay, well, he graduated in 85 or 90 or whatever year it is, and you would go to that specific year range or name range, and you would find the role that has the name range, WA through Z. And you would know I'm somewhere in the beginning of that because it's Walker and it's WA. So you would sift through those images until you find it, much like you do now on a reader printer when you have to load up the role, only now it's all digital. It's all available on your desktop. You just click on the folder, you scroll through the images till you find it. So it is a little bit longer process than having everything index specific, which I'll talk about next, but it is much faster than the old process, which is finding the right role and loading them up. So it's going to save you a ton of time. It's all available online, and it's going to save you a lot of money doing the indexing that way. And then again, if you have the roles, I've seen some projects where they have, they have all the PR cards, so the permanent record cards are labeled one way, and then they have add drops labeled another way, and they have different types of records. We can also physically, or if they're physically separated like that, we can also do it, organize that digitally as well. So the next level of indexing, which is, I think, what most are thinking about when they think, okay, I want my record scanned and indexed, which, by the way, if I didn't mention it, indexing is essentially typing in the name of the record, or it's keying in the name or organizing it. There's a lot of different terms that we use, cataloging, things like that. It's basically how you want the files named, how you're going to find them. Most of our clients or prospective clients say, well, we want it, we want to be able to search by the student's name, social, date of birth, or ID. I have social in it twice. It's that important, I guess. So we get that a lot, and that's understandable because that's how you find things in your system now. With most of the records lately being digital, you have all that information readily available. It's all electronic. That's very easy to do. Getting that information from these old analog microfilm records is more challenging. It essentially requires, if you look at the bottom there, we have a strip of microfilm. It requires somebody in our facility, because this is a FERPA compliant process. These are FERPA these are sensitive records. They have name, social, date of birth. We can't just have this done offshore, which is the next section we'll talk about. They have to be done internally by one of our employees that have been vetted and certified and are allowed to do this. And they have to look at each record and say, this is Jake Walker's record. Here's his social right here. Here's his date of birth here. So we have to find all of those things. a lot of times there's formats that we can follow and we can identify them fairly quickly, but it's still a very laborsome process going through each and looking at each and every single one and finding the correct information and hoping that it's actually there and legible, which is another challenge. That can be very, very lengthy, and as you can probably tell, that's not very inexpensive to do. It can be very, very costly. So we don't do that a lot for microfilm, especially really big projects, because you get priced out. No one really has the budget to do that. It essentially makes the scanning, you take that scanning cost and multiply it 10x, and that's the cost of the project when you have to go through and index each record. So that can become very, very cumbersome and challenging. But we understand that's the ideal format that you want so that you can get it into your Laserfiche or your OnBase or your perceptive content, get it right in and perfect, so you can just type in Jake Walker and it pulls up all my information. We understand that, and we'll do it if you request that. But just understand that that is going to be a very, very big cost factor to consider. So something that can kind of help you with that is subcontractors. Now we understand that this can kind of hold a negative connotation. Using subcontractors, it's somebody else, it's not us. It's you're sending our stuff to somebody that's not safe. That's not the case. We use subcontractors for a lot of work, and none of which will compromise the integrity or the sensitivity of the records. We're a very, very, very process-driven company, and we're focused on security, and so we're not going to allow that to happen. But here are some things that we would want to use subcontractors for. Now, the reason why we would want to use subcontractors, and the reason why this is in this whole webinar in the first place, is because this can affect the cost. If we are using subcontractors to do some of the processes that do not require, them seeing any images and things like that, it can keep the cost down for us, which is then translated over to you. So anytime we can make it less expensive to produce the end product, it'll be less expensive for you to purchase that. So one thing that we do is we have them capture the information from the roll label. So we'll take a photo of each roll of film and we'll send it to our subcontractor, and they will securely view the images and capture and type out the data. Now, 100% of the time, I don't think I've ever seen it where there's not any sensitive information on the roll label. There's not somebody's name and social and things like that. If there ever was, we would flag it and we wouldn't send that off. We would do it internally. But like I said, 100% of the time, that's not the case. But it's always something that could happen, but we do vet that process. We do make sure that there's not anything on there. So we would send the roll label off. It would be captured and send back all the data to us, and that's how we'd help name the file. That keeps the cost down tremendously because somebody's not in here doing it internally at a higher rate. These people are very, very good at what they do. They're very fast, and it's very, very inexpensive to have it done with one of our subcontractors. The next thing is the roll framing. So we've got to look at, the different, we got to look at each image and make sure it's all captured properly. As you see on the images below, those little green boxes are essentially what we do. It's all programmatically, captured, and then the subcontractors look at each one and make sure it's done properly and they didn't miss anything. They'll fix anything that was. This is really important along the process because these are essentially the images that you get back. If anything's missed, which most companies will use a process through the scanner to do that, you're kind of stuck. You don't get those images. Where we go through it and we vet it a couple times so that we make sure every image is captured properly. And they do not see any information. As you see on the bottom left image, that's what they see. It's just a blur of images. That's what they're going to see. They're never, ever going to see any sensitive information. Now, just to reiterate, we do all of this with your permission. We will never, ever use subcontractors unless we have the permission from the client to do that. A lot of times that's done way ahead of time. In the proposal, I'll mention that we'd like to use subcontractors for all these things. The pricing is based on the use of subcontractors to do this and this, which essentially is these two things. And then you say yes, or you say no. Sometimes we have clients that say no, you cannot use subcontractors. So that'll affect the cost. So now we have to do all this stuff internally, which is just a little bit more expensive. So it's something to be aware of, but also understand this is never done without your knowledge, prior knowledge, and permission to use subcontractors for these things. But just wanted to get it out there and explain it to you guys so you understand what we're using them for. so that it's not, it doesn't hold that negative connotation that most people put with subcontractors and sending stuff out. The material never leaves our facility. It's always going to be at our facility. Only these digital blurred images is what they would see. The next factor is schedule. This isn't a huge factor. I haven't seen it come into play too much with registrars, but it is something to be aware of, especially we'll get into what's going on right now in the world, but typically this time of year, not specifically this year, we get a lot of requests. We get a lot of last-minute requests because a lot of our clients are on a July 1 through June 30 fiscal year. So we'll get a lot of requests in April, May, and June where it's, hey, we have an extra $10,000 left in our budget. We need to knock this out. We need to get as much as we can done for that $10,000 so we can encumber the funds from this fiscal year. Can you do it? And we'll get those requests all the way up to about 2 weeks before that deadline. And the answer is yes, we can do it, but at what cost? If it fits within our schedule and normal time, not a big deal. You're not going to pay anything extra, not a big deal. But if it is, drop everything, stop that project, just do our project so we can get it done within the 2 weeks that we have, that could potentially have a higher cost associated with it because now we've got to put off all these other projects, and they're all waiting, while we get this one done. So it has to make, financial sense for everybody for that to work. It doesn't come into play a ton, but it is something to be aware of if for whatever reason you do have a last-minute request. Don't be shocked if, hey, your website says $25 a roll if there's 2,000 rolls, but you're giving me $30 a roll. What's going on? Well, we've had to move these things around and shift and stop this, and so that's why it's a little bit more expensive. That's something to understand. So again, it doesn't come into factor a lot, but it is a cost factor to be aware of. Now, getting into what's going on today, capacity. What our normal capacity would be opposed to what it is today, which is a good example, with the COVID-19 and being in California, we are very limited. So in a normal, typical capacity, we're probably fine. You may find us every once in a while, actually this time of year, typically when it's the end of fiscal years, where we're maybe slammed and we just have, tons and tons of projects. And if you contact us and say, hey, we need this done in 6 weeks, can we get it done? Well, normally we could, but we're really, really backed up on microfilm scanning, so it may take a little bit longer to do that. Are you okay with that? No, we're not okay with that. It has to be done by the end of June. So that's where it could be a little bit more expensive because we have to move things around. It's similar to that scheduling. But like today, for example, with COVID-19 going on, we're very limited as far as our resources go. We're very much a shell of what we typically are, because we're only allowed to do essential work at this point. So unless your project is deemed essential, and even if it is, we may not have the typical capacity to do the project that we would normally have because we're down to 2 or 3 people in this room and 2 to 3 people in that room doing film scanning and fiche scanning and QA and things like that. So again, don't be shocked if you ever come across a time where it's we're just really slammed, so unless you're able to wait a few more weeks, it's going to be a little bit more expensive. Doesn't happen a lot. In fact, I can't really think of any instances where I've had to do that, but it is something to be aware of. How it affects the cost, I don't know. We have the example on the website. It's similar to buying ski clothing. It's going to be a lot less expensive in the summer when they're doing discounts and things like that than it is during the winter when it's high peak. Everything's full priced. So if you catch us at a good time, you may get a little bit better price. But we tend to have very similar pricing year-round because we know all registrars, most registrars talk. So if your sister school got one price and we're giving you a different price because it's higher volume, we're going to work with you on that. Typically, we just end up giving you the same price anyways. But the scheduling may be a little bit inflated, whereas typically, a project, we do a milestone project first, where we do a small sample. So you have, 1,000 rolls, we'll do 10, 15 rolls first. That takes about 2-3 weeks to set up. We'll send you all of the images. You can then look at it and say, okay, this looks great, or maybe we need to tweak this here and there. Once we get your approval on that first milestone, then there's that typical scheduling period. 1,000 rolls may take a month or two typically. with what's going on now, it's maybe ballooned out another month or two. But again, if you can dictate that schedule a little bit on, what you need and when. And we like to know that ahead of time so we can plan out. We're very plan oriented. So if we know ahead of time that it needs to be done by a certain date, that's great. That helps us plan things out a little bit better. The next factor to consider is OCR. So kind of going back to the indexing, if we index to the student level, where we're indexing the name and the social and all those things, OCR is probably not going to be that beneficial. It's kind of fun to have sometimes because you can search things that aren't indexed, like specific professors, classes, semesters, things like that. But if it's indexed to the student level, not terribly essential to have, but it's not a very big cost factor. That's why it's towards the end. It's not too expensive to do, but it's not very beneficial, I think, when you have it indexed. But if you don't have the records indexed, if we just index the role label, having OCR or optical character recognition is going to be really helpful. You could potentially find records very quickly by just typing in the name or date of birth or social, any data that's on the actual material, you could potentially find through OCR. Now, I say potentially because it's not a guaranteed process. Scanning images for microfilm is challenging in and of itself. Now, getting a good enough quality image to get processed for OCR and get good results is even bigger challenge. Now, we fine-tuned our own OCR processes to get as much good information as possible. It's still not a guarantee. You can talk to any of our clients, and they'll all say different things. Some clients will say, it's fantastic. We find records every time, first try. Some will say, well, it takes 2 or 3 tries. It takes us a few minutes to find things. It's going to just completely vary on the quality of the material that's on the microfilm, how well the microfilm scans, and also, I guess one of the biggest factors is it typed or is it handwritten? If it's handwritten, we're not going to find, I've seen some block handwriting get picked up on OCR, but it's not going to get picked up on OCR. The technology is just not good enough yet anywhere to get good results from that or any results from that. So that's also something to consider. Also, we see a lot of transcripts that are, they have writing going up and down and left and right. It can throw things off as well. We try to do the best we can. We'll fine tune it during that milestone phase to make sure that we, get the best results possible. But it is, kind of temper your expectations there a little bit. 70-80% accuracy is a really good rate. Don't expect 100%, but it is a tremendous value when just doing role level indexing. It is always worth the cost, and the cost is nominal, but the benefit is it's quite a bit better than not having it, I guess. So I highly recommend OCR when doing microfilm scanning. And the next factor, I believe this is our last one, is output. So where are these images going to go? Once we've scanned them, once they've been indexed, or however they've been indexed, where are they going to go? Where are you going to put them? I usually ask this question up front. What system are you guys using? Or ideally, where would these go? And I'm surprised half of the time the registrar office that I'm talking to doesn't know the answer to that. They're not quite sure, or maybe they're moving to a new system. In those cases, we've got an awesome solution for you. And even those that have something in mind, we still got a great solution for you. But if you don't know where it's going, we'll help you figure that out. Sometimes a hard drive is the best place to go until you figure that out. Getting it into your system is also a really good option, and it's something we can always do. But let's first, I guess, go through this. That first option is digital reel. For those of you that attended the webinar on April 8th, we had quite a few registrars attend that. I'm not sure how many of you did. You saw what digital reel can do, what it's capable of. Those of you that have stopped by our booth at any of the conferences, you've seen this. If you haven't seen that webinar, we'll send you a link after this so you can watch it. It's a full overview of digital reel, the benefits that you get from it. It's going to be a really, really powerful tool to have when scanning microfilm, because it's going to keep that cost very low. It's going to make it affordable as opposed to not affordable, which is what you're going to be looking at if you're looking into scanning and indexing every record and importing it into Laserfiche or OnBase or something like that. But you have a replica of the microfilm, which is neat. It's an insurance policy. All the images are captured properly. You have the ability to adjust image quality, so we're always ensuring that the images are going to be the best quality images possible. It's really easy to use. It's hosted. It's online. It's secure. You don't have to download anything. You don't have to learn anything. We do trainings and everything. Much lower cost. It's the downside, I guess. There aren't many, and I know this is, this is our product. This is what we sell. So obviously, I'm a little biased. But the downside, if there are any, is it's another system to have. We have some clients that are using 2-3 places to find student records. The old, which technically you're doing already because the microfilm is on. The records are on microfilm, so you have to go to that. Well, now the microfilm's on digital reel. So we go to digital reel for the microfilm records. I mean, that's really what it is. It is another application. However, we can take all the records from all the different places that you have and put them all in one place. And we do that a lot. And it's a really fun project, and it makes things a lot easier for you because you can search and find everything in one place. So consider that if you are looking into different systems. And then another benefit is there's no IT involvement. They don't need to download anything, install anything. They don't need any training. It's essentially, you and I work together. It's very easy to do. We take care of most of the work. Now, the other output, whether it be a hard drive full of all of the images or getting it into your system, so getting it into your student record management system, Laserfiche, OnBase, whatever it may be, we can get it in there. We've worked with a lot of them, and we can figure it out. You're going to have to do the indexing. You can't just scan the roles and do roll label. I mean, I guess in theory you could. It's just not going to be very good. It's going to be difficult to find things. Much more difficult to find things than if you use digital reel and have the OCR and all that. So that getting it into your system obviously is the end goal. It'd be great for everyone, but it's just really expensive. But if it is in your system, then you've got one place for everything, which is great. You paid a lot of money for that system. You're utilizing it. That's fantastic. It's linked with your SIS and some other programs and things that you use. We can import it directly into your system, which is a benefit. You don't have to do anything. Your IT is limited as far as their involvement. There is a little bit of involvement from them. They have to give us the format that we're going to put all those images in to your system. So we do need to have some communication with them. But as far as your involvement, it's very limited there. Just basically making that introduction with the right people so that we know who to talk to when we have problems, things like that. We have a whole. I didn't put the link on there, but we do have a whole blog post. It's very informative about importing into your existing system and digital reel, the costs versus the benefits and things like that. So I highly recommend you check that out for some more information. We've got a lot of homework, I guess, for you guys. So if you're looking for things to do, we've got hours of good information on our website that you can go through. And then, of course, you always have me as a resource if you want to reach out and ask questions, get a ballpark quote, find out what we need to do in order to get more information. We can do samples to get more information. If you want to send us a roll or two, we can scan those at no cost. Obviously, you want to coordinate that with me first so we can make sure we get it in, especially right now with the uncertainty of timing and when we're going to be back in the office. Crossing our fingers for June 1st. But once we get back to normal, then, none of these things are really factors. But that is something we want to coordinate ahead of time. Also, along with that is site visits. I love coming out, visiting, taking a look at the material, assessing it, kind of coming up with a plan with you. Right now, that's obviously on hold, but once things start opening back up, we can schedule that. I can come take a visit, and we can chat about some different options. Let me take a quick look before I wrap things up. We may have a few questions. We have some questions about different types of scanning, which is a little bit off subject, and I understand that it was maybe a little bit misunderstood as far as what we're going to talk about today. We're specific with microfilm. We'll talk about microfiche a little bit later in different webinars, so look out for that. So I'll address this question individually to this person since it's a little bit off subject. But I appreciate everyone's time today. I hope you learned something. I hope this was informative, and I really hope we hear from you. I hope that you have some questions, at least want some idea on the cost. Just send me a quick email saying, hey, what's the cost for this? This is what we have. send a picture or two if you don't want to count them up or if you're not sure how, and I can figure it out for you. But we really, really hope we hear from you. This is a great time to talk about these projects, being that students aren't on campus. So we'd love to at least get the ball rolling a little bit. I know some budgets are a little bit uncertain, but we'd certainly love to get the ball rolling if we can. Look out for more webinars. This is kind of a series unofficially, but we'll have more information and more webinars. So we hope to hear from all of you soon, if not later down the road. Again, thank you for taking a listen, and we hope to hear from you soon.